No chance for the Toronto Blue Jays to win the season series versus the first place Baltimore Orioles. But of all the remaining games for the Toronto Blue Jays, these three coming up at Camden Yards in Baltimore on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday will be amongst the toughest. So it'd be quite a boost to the Blue Jays' playoff chances to win this series, as the Blue Jays are right around the corner from a dozen straight games versus last place teams. So doing well in this three-game series at Baltimore would go a long way in setting the Blue Jays up for success down the stretch. So on today's Locked On Blue Jay podcast, it is all about this series versus the Orioles.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends. Craig Ballard, Locked On Blue Jays. Yes, indeed, been locked on Toronto Blue Jay baseball ever since I can remember in my life. Blue Jay baseball, a big deal for me. I'm speaking your language because you're taking part of your day to talk Toronto Blue Jay baseball with me. So I see you and I thank you for that. Reminder, of course, the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, all of this season's Toronto Blue Jay action available for you to catch on SiriusXM. If you're taking in today's Locked On Blue Jay podcast episode on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast YouTube page, hello and thank you for that. I want to shout out a few new subscribers. I hope I'm saying these names right. Again, just spell it phonetically for me in the comments if I'm getting this wrong. I hope I'm getting it when I say Mao Gomez, Darcy Douglas, Phoenix, and Shockey Woodward. Thank you all for hitting that subscribe. And to the everydayers making the Locked On Blue Jay podcast your first podcast listen every day, thank you as well. And hello to you, of course, as well. Big series, as this is going to be one of the toughest series remaining on the 2023 Toronto Blue Jays schedule. Today's episode, all about this series. Baltimore Orioles, 77 wins. That's second only into the Atlanta Braves, who have 80 in all of baseball. They're 36-23 at home, an absolutely sensational and incredible 41-24 on the road. So Baltimore's been good at home. They've been just incredible on the road. Baltimore 23-12 since the All-Star break. Now that includes 10-5 at home. They've been hot at home. Blue Jays 19-15 since the All-Star break. Now that includes 10-6 on the road. Blue Jays since the All-Star break have been very good on the road. And of course, Blue Jays are coming in fresh off of the road series win this past weekend at Cincinnati. So since the All-Star break, Blue Jays have lost 3.5 games to the Baltimore Orioles in the standings. The Orioles and the Blue Jays, they each have 145 home runs so far this season, but the Orioles have scored 62 more runs than the Toronto Blue Jays. And speaking of long balls, you have Gunnar Henderson and Anthony Santander. They're tied for the Orioles team lead with 21 home runs each. Of course, Bo and Vlad tied for the Blue Jays team lead with 18 each. The average score so far this season, they've gotten together 10 times already this season. The average score is a 6-3 Baltimore Orioles victory. Now, this will be the fourth and final series between these two teams this season. You have to go back. This is the first time since 2017 where the Baltimore Orioles will win the season series over the Toronto Blue Jays. It had been total domination for the Jays over the Orioles. That had come pretty well back to the pack last season. I mean, last season, the Blue Jays 10-9 against Baltimore, so they did win the season series by that one game. You remember previously it was like there was an 18-3 season in there, or 18-3. It was absolute domination. It had been absolute domination for your Toronto Blue Jays over the Baltimore Orioles. But in the 10 games these two teams have played so far this season, the Toronto Blue Jays have amassed all of 2 wins. My goodness. And we know how the Blue Jays have been against American League East foes. And remember Tampa Bay was 13-0 to start the season, then came to Toronto for that weekend series. The Jays took 2 out of 3, and then the next week went to Yankee Stadium and took 2 out of 3. Those were the first 6 games for the Blue Jays this season against division foes, and they started off 4-2. Started off really well, but don't we know things have taken a turn since. Now, the last time the Blue Jays saw an American League East opponent was a couple weekends back. That series at Baltimore, Blue Jays swept that series at Boston. Beg your pardon. Blue Jays swept that series at Boston. So hopefully things have turned around when it comes to Blue Jays versus AL East foes. Now, this is a big series. I say this is a big series, not from the standpoint of being able to catch Baltimore. I don't think catching the Baltimore Orioles is on the table at this point. They're 9 games up on the loss column. Even if the Jays sweep this series now with a little over 30 games back, you're still 6 back in the loss column. I just don't see it. And you would still need to leapfrog Tampa. No, I just don't see it. But I say it's a big series because everydayers will know. I mean, it was as recently as yesterday, even when we did a deep dive of the schedule, that of the remaining schedule for the Toronto Blue Jays, in particular the remaining road schedule, this is definitely, I shouldn't say definitely, because they play three. They finished the season with 3 road games at Tampa Bay. We know Tampa Bay has been a house of horrors for the Toronto Blue Jays over the years, but at this point, I don't know what to make of Tampa Bay, right? Shane McClanahan, horrible news. They lose him for this year and next year, and then whatever the heck this is going on with Wander Franco. My goodness. So who knows what Tampa Bay will look like? Another a month, another 5 weeks from now. So who knows? But this Baltimore series, these 3 road games, I think are probably going to be the 3 toughest road games left on the schedule for the Toronto Blue Jays. Everydayers know we've deep dived the schedule a lot around here on Locked On Blue Jay podcast, and the heavy lifting from the road part of the Toronto Blue Jays 2023 schedule, it's done. The heavy lifting for the road is done. Now, this is the last series here, this Baltimore series. Right after the Blue Jays part ways with the Orioles on Thursday, and these two teams are done with each other for the season, right in that moment, the Blue Jays need to become fans and supporters of Baltimore because of the teams that the Jays are mixing it up with in the wild card race. Baltimore is going to be in that mix, not in the wild card mix, but a lot of these teams are on their schedule. Baltimore has 14 games left with Tampa Bay, with Houston, and with Boston. Baltimore just took 2 out of 3, by the way, last week from Seattle as well. So there are times recently here where the Blue Jays have had to cheer for the Baltimore Orioles. But yes, indeed, 14 left with Tampa Bay, Houston, and Boston. And what's interesting there is the Orioles finished the season with 4 at home against Boston. Now, hopefully, Baltimore's going to need, have a horse in that race. Hopefully, Baltimore's going to need to win those games. They're 5 up on Texas right now for the best record in the league, so for the number 1 seed. So hopefully in those last 4 games, and if the Blue Jays can do well in this series, hopefully Texas can close that gap. So if you're the Blue Jays, the best case scenario is that the Orioles have something to play for in those last 4 games. Don't want Boston, who apparently is insisting on hanging around. We don't want them on paper to have a really difficult 4-game series at Baltimore turn into not such a difficult 4-game series at Baltimore, especially to end the season. Coming up on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, more deep diving this Blue Jays at Orioles series. Reminder, all 3 of these games, of course, available on SiriusXM. Now, for now, I wanted to mention that I'm now up to 4 pairs of Bird Dog stretchy pants and shorts. Bird Dogs fit way better than regular pants that are made of that stiff, restricting cotton. And Bird Dogs has fixed that issue by inventing cloud knit fabric, which looks great. It looks just like khaki, but it stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice any movement. Bird Dogs also uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric. That helps keep you cool and dry all day long. That's why you can take your Bird Dogs. I mean, you can wear them to the golf course, then out for dinner, you're hanging out with friends. I mean, you name it, Bird Dogs is going to be there for you. Go to birddogs.com/lockedonmlb. Enter the promo code lockedonmlb for a free white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonmlb. Enter the promo code lockedonmlb for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, and I'll show you here. Hey, look at that logo there. I've got the white hat. Now, which Toronto Blue Jays have done well? Who needs to keep doing what they've been doing against the Orioles this season? And who needs to turn things around? Well, let's start with Whit Merrifield, because he's kind of a combination of all of that. What's he need to keep doing? He's got 11 hits. 11 hits versus the Orioles this season. That's the most hits he's got versus any opponents this season. But with those 11 hits, somehow, because he's not a strikeout machine, somehow he also has 11 strikeouts. That's also the most he's had against any team. And Whit just 2 for 4. He's stolen 2 bases, but been caught twice against Baltimore. That sort of ratio, not even close to what his potential is or what we've seen from him this season for the Toronto Blue Jays. So Whit Merrifield, keep being that 2-hit Whit, right? Keep being that hitting machine, absolutely yes, but a little bit of a better eye at the plate, a lot less swings and misses, and a little bit better on the base pass in this series. Bo Bichette hitting .357 this season versus the Orioles. No home runs. Now, no home runs yet, right? Yet. Let's be glass half full. No home runs yet for Bo against Baltimore. Now, Bo Bichette has scored 4 runs this season against the New York Yankees. He scored 4 runs this season against the Boston Red Sox. Bo Bichette scored 4 runs this season against the Tampa Bay Rays. None versus the Baltimore Orioles. .357 batting average, no runs scored. Well, that's because the 2 people directly behind him have been abysmal. I mean, the way Baltimore is pitching, Vlad Guerrero and Matt Chapman, is working. Vlad 5 for 35. That's a 143 batting average. No homers, just 2 RBIs so far this season in 10 games versus Baltimore. Oh boy. And Matt Chapman, remember now, Matt Chapman, the only good we saw from Matt Chapman this season was in April. Well, the Blue Jays didn't start playing the Orioles until the end of May. So the Orioles have no idea what everyone was marveling about with April Matt Chapman. They have no idea because they've only seen since April Matt Chapman, who's been absolutely terrible. And Chapman this season versus Baltimore, 6 for 39. That's a 154 batting average, 1 home run, 209 on base percentage. That's incredible. A 209 on base percentage. Matt Chapman has been terrible against anybody, right? But in particular against the Baltimore Orioles. Now, how about Dalton Varsho? Dalton Varsho, there's some incredibly bad news here, but maybe some good news here. So let the incredibly bad news, I mean, overall, 5 for 30 versus Baltimore this season, 167 batting average, no home runs, no RBIs. His OPS versus Baltimore this season is 476. All bad, all bad. Here comes even more bad against the Orioles at the Rogers Center this season. 1 for 19. Pardon me, say that again, Craig. Yeah, 1 for 19. Craig, you mentioned there might be some good. Okay, well, let's interject some good here from Dalton Varsho. First of all, how well he's swinging the bat lately. Let's acknowledge that. But he played a series. It was his first and only series. Every day, as we remember, we were looking at the last time the Blue Jays, because this is their second series at Camden Yards in Baltimore against the Orioles this season, right? Every day, as you remember, that first series, we deep dived this ballpark. Could it be a ballpark that Varsho could get hits in and kickstart his bat? Obviously, it didn't kickstart his bat because he just got going recently, but he did hit well in that series. He had 4 for 11 in that series at Camden Yard back in mid-May, I believe that was. So, I mean, that's a glass half full there, right? Everything else from start to finish has been terrible for Varsho against most teams, in particular the Orioles. But lately, Dalton Varsho swinging a good bat, and he did look good in that previous series at Camden. Now, how about from a catcher standpoint? Wow. Last season, the Toronto Blue Jays got more production from the catcher spot than any other position on the team. This season, it's been turned on its head. There's no position that's been worse from an offensive production standpoint for the Toronto Blue Jays than the catcher spot. Well, this series should be different. Jansen and Kirk have both done very well against the Orioles this season. Danny Jansen has 4 home runs versus the Baltimore Orioles this season. There's another team, I want to say it's the Yankees, and there's another team that I know Danny Jansen has 2 home runs against this season, but this is by far his most against any team, 4. And remember, he had in this very ballpark, it was mid-June. It was back in June. Sorry, the series that was Blue Jays and Baltimore in Baltimore was one in June. And if you recall that series, Danny Jansen hit 2 home runs in that series. Alejandro Kirk, 8 for 23 this season. Now, 7 singles, so he's not exactly tearing the cover off the ball, right? And no home runs, so nothing like that, but still 8 for 23 is 8 for 23. I mean, that's a 348 batting average, right? Any way you slice it, I'm absolutely going to take that. And back in that series as well, in June, not only did Danny Jansen hit well at Camden, well, Alejandro was 3 for 9 with 3 RBIs as well in that series, so he hit well as well. So finally, a series we can look forward to some production from the catcher spot, some consistent, I should say, production, because Danny Jansen, of course, has had his moments. Kevin Kiermaier just 6 for 36. I mean, Baltimore's faced him a zillion times, right? From all his years with Tampa Bay, Baltimore knows how they want to attack Kevin Kiermaier. He's not been able to make those adjustments. 6 for 36 on the season versus Baltimore, all 6 hits, singles. Kevin Kiermaier in a big series here. Yeah, definitely going to need KK to be better than that. Now, how about George Springer? I saved what I'm most excited about here. I'll say the best here for last. The only teams with multiple Springer dingers hit against them so far this season are Detroit and Baltimore. And one of those Springer dingers was against tonight's starter, Grayson Rodriguez, a.k.a. G-Rod. Springer as well. He this season also tied with Detroit and Baltimore for most RBIs on the season with 5. And remember, those 5 RBIs Springer has had so far this season against Baltimore, and I believe he's played 9 of the 10 games against Baltimore this season. Remember, those are all in the leadoff spots, so not really RBI opportunities. Now Springer's hitting 4th and 5th. Now he's hitting in RBI spots. He's already had RBI success against Baltimore, and George Springer has a career 897 OPS at Baltimore. We could be looking at a really, really good series from George Springer, and dare I say, an important series from George Springer. He's been so well below his career averages, and he's putting his worst season together. I mean, his worst overall season together, and in some categories, by far his worst season together. Well, he can alleviate a lot of that if he uses the Baltimore series at Camden, where he hits the Orioles well. He's always hit well at Camden Yard. Use this as a springboard. Let's get something positive going into September and have George Springer be really significant down the stretch for the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, how about the Baltimore Orioles? What do the Jays need to do? Well, we know we know the list starts with Ryan Mountcastle, right? Ryan Mountcastle finally starting to hit. I mean, I shouldn't say finally because we don't, as a Blue Jay fan, we don't want Baltimore to do well, but it is kind of interesting to see him finally starting to hit against teams that aren't the Blue Jays. Mountcastle hitting 377 with a 438 on base and a 1,051 OPS since the All-Star break. He's been absolute fire. Really interesting. I mean, every day is, of course, in that first series, Mountcastle kills the Blue Jays. So every day, as you'll remember, we really deep dived the Blue Jays versus Mountcastle in that first series, and the Jays held them to 1 for 12. That one hit, of course, was a home run because it's Ryan Mountcastle against the Blue Jays. Of course it was, but 1 for 12 in that first series. He misses the second series, which is that one at Baltimore in June. And then in the most recent series, 1 for 12. Hey, have the Blue Jays turned the table on this guy? Yeah. Well, in the most recent series, 11 for 13. Pardon me? 11 for 13 in the most recent series against the Toronto Blue Jays. And we always know Ryan Mountcastle kills the Toronto Blue Jays, right? Always hits, not to the tune of 11 for 13. That's otherworldly. Like that's, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. To state the very obvious, in this 3-game series on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, Toronto Blue Jays is going to need to be significantly better than they have been against Ryan Mountcastle. Adley Rutschman has 13 hits versus the Blue Jays. That's more than any other. I think he does have a little bit more against the Yankees, but the Orioles have finished their season series with the Yankees, so they've played them a few more times. But Adley's certainly a bat that the Blue Jays are going to have to try to contain. Another youngster here on this team, Gunnar Henderson. Now, some real good news and bad news here. Gunnar Henderson's, quickly jumped on the scene for this Orioles team, one of their many youngsters coming up. And I know that he's impressed a lot of Toronto Blue Jay fans as well. He should have. He's got 3 home runs this season as a rookie against the Blue Jays. I mean, my goodness, that's the very bad news. But the good news, 2 of those home runs came against Chris Bassett. The other came against Hyunjin Ryu. Those are the only 2 of the 5-man rotation for the Blue Jays that will not pitch in this series. How about Ryan O'Hearn, the Orioles' new cleanup man? I mean, one of the more under the radar seasons. In all of baseball, you wonder how did Baltimore? We knew the Orioles would be good next year and going forward, but how did they jump leapfrog into contention already so quickly? Number 1 team in the American League. Like, are you kidding me right now? Well, this guy Ryan O'Hearn, he comes over from Kansas City, and he's having a career season for the Baltimore Orioles. They've got him hitting in that cleanup spot. Against the Blue Jays this season, how about 8 for 24 with a pair of home runs? And what home runs as well. You remember the Blue Jays were actually winning one of those games. We're actually going to win for a rare occasion against the Orioles this season. Up 5-2 in the 8th, brought in Jordan Romano with 2 outs, brought in Jordan Romano with 2 out and 2 on to get that 4-out save at Rogers Center. And you remember O'Hearn took him out of the ballpark to tie the game at 5. Orioles would go on to win in the 10th. They would go on to win 6-5 in that game. So that's the one home run O'Hearn has. Now, the other one was against Chris Bassett as well. Cedric Mullins. Now, Cedric Mullins traditionally struggles mightily versus the Toronto Blue Jays. If you're a Blue Jay fan over the years, Mullins has been one of the guys that I'll speak for myself, I guess, that I've really respected for the Baltimore Orioles. I think he's so good. But it is true that the Blue Jays have really had his number, really pitched effectively to him over the years. And this season, Cedric Mullins, from different injuries, he's missed actually 2 of the 3 series between these 2 teams. But do you remember him in that one series? He had that 1 5-hit game. Overall, he was 7 for 15 in the series with 3 doubles and a home run. His OPS in that series, in that 3-game series, 1.367. 1.367, Cedric Mullins. Now, the good news is the home run was against Alek Manoah, so we know that's not on the table in this series. But yeah, I mean, quite an unfortunate turn of events. That's one of the main things when you look at how the Baltimore Orioles turned this around. This matchup used to be all Toronto Blue Jays. How have the Orioles turned this around against the Blue Jays? That's one of the big things right there. Cedric Mullins, especially in that series, was just incredible. We know their bullpen, Baltimore's bullpen, is insane. Their setup man and their closer are both in their second season, and they're both just unbelievable. They were both all-stars this season. I mean, is that good? Holy cow. Now, Yennier Cano, the setup man, the Blue Jays have actually done well against him. He's logged 4 2/3 innings this season, 7 hits and a home run he's allowed. And against the rest of the league, he's got 5.5 strikeouts for every walk. But against the Blue Jays this season, 5.5 to every walk. Against the Blue Jays, 1-1. 3 strikeouts, 3 walks. And that 1 home run, by the way, Whit Merrifield. Whit Merrifield. So I wouldn't mind seeing a repeat performance of that, of course, in this 3-game series. And then how about Baltimore's closer, Felix Bautista? Also the all-star, my gosh. He's 1-0 with 2 saves this season versus the Blue Jays. Wow, no runs, 2 hits, 4 walks. Now, his 4 walks are his most versus any opponent. So to some sort of extent, the Blue Jays haven't gotten hits off of Cano and Bautista to the point where they've beaten Baltimore, but to some extent they've had more success against these two than other teams. That's for absolutely certain. And the 4 walks are that's Bautista's most against any other team. 12 strikeouts, so he's bringing it there. Now, one guy to watch, Felix Bautista matchup. I mean, Matt Chapman 0 for 6 with 5 strikeouts. Oh my gosh. Now, how about the pitching matchups? Now, it's going to be Kevin Gausman versus Jack Flaherty tomorrow. We're going to deep dive that, and then Jose Barrios versus Adine Kramer on Thursday. In the finale, we'll deep dive that as well, of course. But how about tonight's on those show days? But how about tonight's pitching matchup? Yusei Kikuchi versus Grayson Rodriguez. Wow, both of these pitchers are on absolute fire. Both of these pitchers have had 6 starts since the All-Star break. In fact, Grayson Rodriguez was just recalled from the minors after the All-Star break, so they both had 6 starts since the All-Star break. Both pitchers have lowered their ERA in every single one of those starts. Extremely impressive. Let's start with Yusei Kikuchi. 4th start of the season for Yusei versus the Baltimore Orioles, 1-1 with a 3.52 ERA. Now, he did have one of those starts at Camden, didn't get out of the 5th inning. He threw 96 pitches, allowed just 2 runs, so it wasn't horrible, and had 7 strikeouts. So really, it was the strikeouts that sort of raised up that pitch total. But as this is game 1 of this series, of course, even with the Blue Jay bullpen being very rested, thank you, Bowden Francis, great job on Sunday and the day off yesterday. Even with that being the case, I would submit it's never ideal to get into your bullpen, super early in game 1 of a series. So definitely hoping to see more like 6 innings, a lot closer to that than 4 2/3 from Yusei tonight. Now, since that start against the Orioles back at Camden Yards, Kikuchi's had 10 starts since then. Blue Jays are 7-3 in those 10 starts, including a win over the Baltimore Orioles. That was their 2nd time of the 10 games that they've beaten Baltimore this season. Now, overall, in one start, Kikuchi had that game where he had 5 walks against Milwaukee, but from a season total, by far more walks against the Orioles than anybody else this season. So definitely going to need to watch that. Again, keeping that pitch count low. Need him in at least the 5th, hopefully the 6th inning tonight. 3 August starts so far, and the Toronto Blue Jays offense has, for Kikuchi, of course, and the Toronto Blue Jay offense has totaled in those 3 Kikuchi starts 6 runs. 6 runs, including that 1-0 loss a couple starts ago, by the way. This offense, right? Hopefully it's going to get going, but I know this offense, right? My goodness. Now, again, the 6 starts since the All-Star break, lowering his ERA in all 6 starts. That is a major tip of the hat to Yusei Kikuchi. Of course, we know Ryan Mountcastle and Adley Rutschman need to be dealt with. Well, they are 12 for 26. That's a .462 batting average, and 6 of those 12 hits have left the ballpark. So Mountcastle and Rutschman versus Kikuchi has been a nightmare matchup for the Blue Jays. Have to watch those matchups very closely today. Now, the good news for the Blue Jays is the rest of the Orioles lineup combined 24 for 102. That's just a .235 batting average versus Kikuchi. And the rest of the middle of that Orioles lineup, so outside of Mountcastle and Rutschman, it's your Austin Hayes, your Gunnar Henderson, your Cedric Mullins. These guys are combined 6 for 39. That's a .154 batting average versus Yusei Kikuchi. So we may have to see the pitch count up a little bit because he may have to pitch around Mountcastle and Rutschman in some spots tonight because he knows Kikuchi will know that there's some places in the Baltimore lineup that he can navigate to get his outs. The Austin Hayes, the Gunnar Hendersons, the Cedric Mullins. How about the opponent, Grayson Rodriguez? Man, Orioles top pitching prospect, one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. At the end of May, Grayson Rodriguez was 2-2. His ERA was 7.5. 2-2. His ERA was 7.5. One of the top pitching prospects in baseball. So he was sent back to the minors, recalled after the All-Star break. Since being recalled, 35 2/3 innings pitched, 12 earned runs. That's a 3.03 ERA. And again, I have to say, because it's such a hat tip moment, has lowered his ERA in all 6 of his starts since being recalled. The Orioles have gone to a 6-man rotation, and G-Rod, Grayson Rodriguez, call him G-Rod. G-Rod is excelling with the extra rest. And today, comes in having pitched. The last time he pitched was last Tuesday. So definitely be looking for 100 miles per hour plus tonight from a rested Grayson Rodriguez. Now, this will be the third start of the season for the rookie versus the Toronto Blue Jays. The previous two were in Toronto. Vlad 0 for 5 with a pair of strikeouts so far against Grayson Rodriguez. Now, one guy I am interested to see is Santiago Espinal. Let's see if Espy's in the lineup tonight. Espy, this was the one time, if you take your mind's eye back, remember Espinal had that injury list, a stint there, and the game that sent him to the injury list when he got hurt, stealing a base, I believe it was against Baltimore. He was 3 for 3 in that game, including 2 for 2 against Grayson Rodriguez. Do you remember that game? It was literally the best game he's had all season. I'd hoped as the game was unfolding that it might be something to give him momentum, to kickstart how bad his season has been. Then he got hurt right at the end of it, ended up on the injured list. But anyway, point being, I mean, the last time we saw Grayson Rodriguez or Espinal had a chance to see Grayson Rodriguez, he did very well against him. So I'm interested to see if Espinal's on the lineup tonight. And Espinal, by the way, was on base for a 2-run Springer ding. Remember, we mentioned George Springer hit a home run off of G-Rod the last time these two faced as well. Now, overall, the Baltimore Orioles have lost 4 of Grayson's last 5 home starts. He's hot and they're hot, yes, but a lot of that success has come on the road. Let's hope they continue to scuffle at home. That's a wrap for Tuesday's Locked On Blue Jay podcast episode. Wanted to dedicate it all because this is an important series against the Baltimore Orioles. I know we like to do trivia usually on Tuesdays. Every now and then we're so packed on a Tuesday that we do Trivia Tuesday on Wednesday. This is one of those weeks, so tune in tomorrow for trivia. We'll also get set for Game 2 of this Blue Jays Orioles series tomorrow on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast. That game, of course, will be available on SiriusXM. For now, keep it locked on the Locked On Podcast Network and check out Sully hosting Locked On MLB. Go Jays, go, and we'll talk tomorrow.